Between 1956 and 1964, Conn Findlay dominated Olympic rowing for the United States in the pair-width event like no one before him and no one since. Conn won 3 successive Olympic medals, 2 golds, one in 1956 in Melbourne, another in 1964 in Tokyo, and a bronze medal at the 1960 Games in Rome. In that same 9-year period, Conn won 5 national championships in the pair with, 1 in the pair without, 1 in the four with, and brought home a gold medal from the 1963 Pan Am Games in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Still not finished, Conn won another Olympic bronze medal in Montreal in 1976, this time sailing with Dennis Conner in the Tempest class. Conn then achieved highest honors in sailing as a crew member on Ted Turner's yacht Courageous when it won the America's Cup in 1978. At the 1996 Olympic Games in Atlanta, Conn was honored as one of the 100 greatest living United States Olympians, a recognition well deserved. During his near decade-long medal run in rowing, Conn had 8 different coxswains. Until 1961, he never used the same coxswain more than one season, and some less than that. Somehow, I was the only cox Conn ever invited back, giving me a front row, bow-loaded seat for his 5-year run-up for a repeat gold medal at the 1964 Olympics. Conn's coxswains seemed to have a 1-year life expectancy when I got my first chance in 1960. It was not much different for Conn's pair partners. Conn was very circumspect. He chose his partners carefully, evidenced by the success he achieved with all of them. However, until 1962, Conn never rowed a second season with the same partner. He changed all that with his only repeat pair partner, Ed Ferry, between 1961 and 1964. I've often wondered why it was that Conn kept competing with Ed and me year after year, but not with any of the others. Conn always had the greatest respect for his partners. He was never one to throw a teammate under the bus, even though there were times I thought I was headed in that direction. Why did his partnership with Ed and me survive season after season when others did not? After almost 50 years pondering this question, I've concluded it was because Ed was simply that good, and I was simply that lucky. As a 6'7", 200-plus pound, raw-boned senior at USC in 1954, Conn was recruited by Coach Bob Hillen to row 1 year with the USC varsity. Conn's older brother Bill was already a member of the Stanford crew. Conn's only previous water sport was sailing, pursued years earlier as a Sea Scout on San Francisco Bay during his adolescent years in Belmont, California. Conn was not a natural jock. He did not play the traditional sports of baseball, basketball, or football. But as this photograph of the 1954 USC varsity crew suggests, Coach Hillen somehow foresaw a great rowing future for Conn. Could it be that he noticed Conn towering a full head above everyone else? Coach Hillen may have also known of Conn's fierce independence, his self-reliance, which befits any great rower. Specifically, even though Conn's college credits were all earned at USC, he eschewed the social life of a Trojan undergraduate and lived several miles away in a UCLA fraternity. Hard to believe that in 1955, after only 1 year of college rowing, he and Dan Ayrault, then a senior at Stanford and captain of Stanford's varsity crew, audaciously decided to train in the pair with for the 1956 Olympic trials. There was an awkwardness about their decision, however. Stanford had a very strong varsity crew that year, and in the spring of 1956, Stanford defeated both California and Washington with Dan Ayrault in its varsity boat. Lou Lindsay was Stanford's varsity coach. and his varsity crew also had its eye on winning the Olympic trials in the 8. Thus the dilemma. Olympic Rowing Committee rules did not allow anyone to row in more than one event. Dan had to choose. Either go with Conn for a very uncertain future in the pair, or support the Stanford crew's excellent opportunity to qualify in the 8. Dan chose the pair. Conn and Dan were receiving no coaching in the Bay Area. Instead, they sent film loops of their workouts to Seattle for viewing by George Pocock. George then wrote back with his comments and tips. Conn and Dan's first choice for their coxswain was Stanford's frosh coach, Rowd Davis. They trained with Rowd throughout the winter of 1955 and 56, including one of their several trips to Seattle, shown here on American Lake near Seattle. They would load their pair on top of Conn's Mercury sedan and drive to Seattle for a long weekend for the only live coaching they ever received from George and Stan Pocock before the trials. When time came for college racing to begin in the spring of 1956, Rowd had to choose between coaching the frosh and coxing the pair. He chose coaching. This opened the door for Stanford's JV cox, Kurt Seifert. Conn and Dan put this question to Kurt. Do you want to go to the Olympics with us? Kurt thought that sounded pretty good and accepted on the spot. Conn and Dan neglected to tell Kurt that other pairs were favored, and there was a chance they might not even make the team. After paying Pan Am $109 to fly their pair and a single scull from San Francisco to Idlewild Airport, New York, in 2 used construction pipe containers modified for the trip by Conn, they loaded the containers on a station wagon roof and drove them from New York City to Lake Onondaga for the trials. After training another month at Onondaga, they won the trials by less than a length over a boat from Detroit. Stroked by one of Conn's future partners, Jack Grouse, and coxed by Conn's future coxswain, Peter Popp. Stanford's varsity 8, without Dan in the boat, was barely eliminated from the trials by Washington, the same crew Stanford had defeated earlier in the season with Dan in the boat. Bottom line, Dan and Kurt made the right choices, Rowd the wrong choice. After an intensive training period in Seattle after the trials, with Pfeiffer and Hecht, Stanford's other Olympic pair, under the watchful eyes of the Pococks, Conn, with only 1 year of college rowing, a year in the pair with Dan, and 1 season as Stanford's frosh crew coach, struck gold in Australia's gold mining region on Lake Wendouree in Ballarat at the 1956 Olympics. Interestingly, and little known, is the fact that Conn and Dan lost their semi-final to the German pair, stroked by its now famous 1960 gold medalist from the Rome Wunderachter, Karl von Grotek. Then Conn and Dan came back in the Ballarat final and beat Germany to nab the gold. The Germans raced in a bow-loaded coxed pair, seen for the first time in Ballarat. This left an impression on Conn, which became even more significant when Conn gave me my chance in the winter of 1960. Dan's recollections of training with Conn accurately portray Conn as a man of solitude and independence. Dan recalls how Conn spoke sparingly with him, and then only about things directly pertinent to their training. Dan rarely knew what Conn did between workouts, where he went, how he supported himself, or much of anything about Conn's life outside the boat. That really bothered Dan. Dan was married, living a normal life in his Seattle hometown, and was one of the most handsome, loquacious, outgoing guys you'd ever meet. His father was a retired Navy admiral. Dan had been captain of the crew at Stanford. After his naval career, he became headmaster at the Lakeside School in Seattle, a high-profile position in Seattle society. After his second gold medal in the straight four in Rome, Dan was even mentioned as a possible candidate for either governor or senator from the state of Washington. Dan simply could not fathom how anyone could be as quiet, private, and introspective as Conn, or how day after day, mile after mile, sitting only 26 inches away from him in the pair, Conn could say so little about himself or his life except for rowing. For Kurt, it was different. He knew how lucky he was just to be along for the ride. On particularly long workouts around Lake Washington's Mercer Island, Kurt's main concern was what they had packed for lunch. Conn's instructions to Kurt were simple and direct. Sit quietly in the boat, here's what we want you to say, and when we want you to say it. And don't move at all. Sit perfectly still, we'll do the rest. Outside the boat, Conn's life was of no concern at all to Kurt. When the '56 Olympics were over and their gold medals safely stowed, Conn, Dan, and Kurt went their separate ways. Conn returned to the Bay Area, began an MBA program in 1957 at Cal, and found a new pair partner for the 1957 Nationals. In 1958, he became varsity crew coach at Stanford, finished his MBA, but did not row that season. Dan pursued a successful naval career on destroyers in the Pacific, later found a new UW pair partner in Jay Hall, and won the 1958 Nationals in the pair with during Conn's MBA rowing furlough. Dan returned to rowing with the Lake Washington Rowing Club in 1960 and won a second Olympic gold medal in the straight four in Rome, this time with John Sayre, Rusty Wales, and Ted Nash. If there were any other reasons why Conn and Dan didn't continue in the pair together, we'll never know, as Dan is no longer with us to answer that question, and Conn would never tell. Kurt became an Army officer, dropped out of rowing, then resurfaced with the Lake Washington Rowing Club in the USA Olympic four with at the Rome Olympics in 1960. Kurt's four barely missed the Olympic finals. 3 other Olympic team boats from Lake Washington, including our pair, made the finals. Just before we pushed off in our pair for the starting line of the finals, I remember Kurt grinning at me, exclaiming how glad he was that his '56 gold medal was already safely back in Seattle in his sock drawer. Kurt is one of my best friends, but he deserved to be thrown under the bus for that untimely comment. By contrast, Stan Pocock's last comment to us was this: when you're out there on the starting line, take a good look at all the crews. There may never be another moment when you're among the 6 best at anything in the world. When Conn returned to Belmont after Melbourne, he was named that city's Man of the Year. Conn never mentioned this to me. I learned about it from an article in his mother's scrapbook, which I found in her basement after she passed away. In 1957, with Dan and Kurt gone, Conn teamed up with Jack Grouse to row the pair at the Nationals. Grouse was in the Detroit Club boat that placed second to Conn and Dan a year earlier at the 1956 Olympic trials. Conn and Jack trained with weights, not a live cox in the boat, and recruited James McGarvey to cox their boat at the 1957 Nationals on the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia, where they rowed out of the Fairmount Boat Club on Boathouse Row. Conn was a stickler about personal training habits. He did not smoke and would not partner up with anybody who did. The post-race months in autumn were reserved for drinking and fun. But come January 1st, and until racing was over, no beer or any other alcohol was to be consumed. Conn was religious about this all the way through Tokyo, without exception. Jack Grouse was a bit more of a free-spirited, a Motor City, don't tell me what to do type of guy. He was every bit as strong, bony, and independent-minded as Conn. What a perfect rowing match. The problem was, Conn was sure Jack was catching a few smokes on the sly. He just couldn't prove it. One day before they launched their pair from Fairmount for a pre-race workout, Conn called Jack on this. "You've been smoking." Jack reacted immediately and told Conn they should settle it on the water. During the workout, Conn pulled as hard as he could, but in the end, Jack turned the boat on him. When they docked, Conn went upstairs to shower. Jack stayed down on the dock. When Jack didn't come upstairs, Conn looked down from the window. There was Jack, reclining peacefully against a boat sling, casually blowing smoke rings. Although they remained friends and went on to win both the 1957 pair-width and the four-width national titles, Conn never rode with Jack again. After skipping the 1958 season to finish his MBA, Conn formed his third pair lineup with John Fish in Seattle in the summer of 1959. A year earlier, John had stroked the Washington 8 that lost to the Soviets in the finals of the Henley Grand Challenge, then turned the tables and defeated that same Soviet crew a few weeks later in Russia. Their cox was Pete Popp, a former Stanford cox in the early 50s and a native from the Seattle area. Conn, John, and Pete went to the Pan Am trials on the Detroit River with the other Washington Athletic Club crews coached by Stan Pocock, but were edged out by a Detroit Boat Club pair and placed second. My turn came as Conn laid out his plans for the 1960 Olympic trials. It was the winter of my junior year at Stanford when Conn pulled a sit-up pair from the racks of the Stanford boathouse and took out a hammer, saw, and screwdriver. He and his new partner, Dick Drager, a 1959 Stanford graduate, had decided to make a go of it in the pair at the trials. Word had come down that Al Rosenberg, cox and coach of the Vesper Boat Club, had asked the Pococks to build them a bow-loaded pair for the trials, and that the Olympic Committee had ordered another such boat for the Olympic team. That, plus the memory of his loss in Ballarat to the Germans in their bow-loaded boat, convinced Conn to build one of his own. Conn said he preferred the sit-up cox, thought bow-loading made no difference, but decided to go bow-loaded because that was the boat being built for the Olympic qualifier, and he expected to be that qualifier. I watched from a distance as Conn worked on the boat. From time to time, Conn asked me to lie down in the boat like a dummy so he could check his measurements. I felt like I was being fitted for a new suit. Conn had draped a piece of oilcloth from gunwale to gunwale for the coxswain to lie in. He had no intention of giving me a pillow or a mattress or making it comfortable. When I laid down in the sling, my backbone rubbed against the wooden keel, but I did not complain. Despite my being a bit tall for a cox at 5 feet 8 inches, it worked. Apparently Conn figured, if the shoe fits, wear it, and decided to give me a try. Nothing I had learned in 3 years as a coxswain at Stanford prepared me for what lay ahead in the pair. At first, I was never even in the boat. Instead, Conn cut 60 degrees out of a large tire inner tube, filled it with 110 pounds of concrete, tied off each end with heavy wire, labeled it coxswain, and put it in the boat for his workouts with Dick. There it lay in the boat, workout after workout until spring quarter ended, an inert, speechless lump of dead weight, giving Conn all that he ever needed from a coxswain. At least he labeled it coxswain, not Kent. Nice of him, and that was just the beginning. I had heard a lot about Conn and coxswains. None of it sounded good from my perspective. During that first month of June, I simply replaced the tube of concrete. It rained like crazy all month. My wetsuit was just that, always wet to the skin. I was forever lying in accumulations of cold rainwater, which ran back and forth from my neck to my butt as the boat checked slightly with each stroke. Conn was in the bow, where he could reach me, and Dick was at stroke. All I did was lie there. The boat had no tiller lines, so I had no way to steer. I had less empowerment than a little kid with his first toy steering wheel attached to a glove box by a suction cup. I argued we ought to hook up the tiller to deal with the crosswinds. Conn refused. We need to learn to row without a rudder. A rudder is only an emergency device, an opinion painfully confirmed for us 2 years later in Lucerne. Still, when the boat would turn into the wind, Conn would bitch at me for not staying on course as if I could have prevented it. Being the new kid in the boat, I kept quiet and endured. Conn loved this picture, taken in 1962 in Buffalo, showing me lying uselessly in the bow, just like the inner tube, before he connected my tiller to the rudder lines. My biggest problem was orientation. I had never competed in any sport lying on my back looking up at the sky. I'd lost all sense of direction and warned Conn and Dick of wakes from the port when they were coming from the starboard. Conn hated that and never let me forget that the inner tube never gave wrong information. With me being so close to the water, wakes coming straight at us always looked bigger to me than they were. Often I'd panic and shout, "Way enough," for wakes I would not even have noticed had I been sitting up. Conn would jump on this with searing comments every time. Sometimes, when I was so paranoid about Conn's reactions, I said nothing when really big wakes approached. Then, when water crashed over the bow and me, soaking everyone and flooding the boat, Conn let me have it again. Then there were stroke rates. I carried 2 watches, one for elapsed time, one for stroke rates. These were cheap, unmarked 30-second sweep watches. They were not marked for stroke rates. I measured the rates over 3 full strokes, starting the watch on the first and stopping on the 4th catch. I memorized where the watch's pointer would be for all the rates from 18 to 45 strokes per minute, to the nearest 1/2 stroke per minute. Conn wanted stroke rates every 30 seconds in a race, in workouts almost as frequently. After taking each stroke rate, I was to say only one word, stroke, followed by one number, the rate. Then I was to take it again right away and tell Conn if it changed. Often I would say, stroke 30, then take it again, see it was 30.5, and say, stroke 30.5. Conn never believed me when I said the stroke had changed, always telling me I'd made a mistake. It got so bad that when the stroke rate changed only slightly, and I knew the first stroke rate had been wrong, I'd sometimes feed him the same wrong stroke rate again just to avoid his wrath. Then there was the weight thing. As a Stanford freshman, I thought I was a skinny 130 pounds. I had no idea how far I really was from the 110-pound minimum weight for Olympic coxswains, or how difficult it would be for me to get down to that weight. Conn made no bones about it. He was not going to carry more weight than the rules required. I had to weigh 110, with shorts, shirt, socks, and 2 watches, not an ounce more. I went on one crash diet after another for 5 years, living on less than 1,500 calories a day for 6 months at a time to make weight. I did not exercise. That would create muscle, and muscle tissue was heavier than if I just wasted away. When I walked along in long pants, my legs did not even touch the insides of my trousers. Dick Lyon took this picture of what was left of me moments before we launched for our Tokyo final. Conn also insisted I not be below 110. He did not want me carrying weights. I might lose the weights overboard, or somehow screw things up so that we would be disqualified after a race was over. Conn constantly reminded me that coxswains can lose races, but they cannot win them. Losing that much weight left me a jumpy, grumpy, nervous skeleton all the time, sleeping up to 14 hours a day just to build up some stamina. But that was the requirement. I did not complain because I never wanted to hear what Conn would say if I raced at 112 pounds and we lost by less than a few tenths of a second. Between 1960 and 1964, I hit the 110 requirement 8 times. In my 1960 plunge, a doctor detected a heart murmur which had been diagnosed by my pediatrician when I was 1 or 2 years old. On another occasion, the Seattle Army Induction Center rejected me for military service because I was 9 pounds too light for my height. That 4F classification, just before the team left for Tokyo, was the only personal perquisite I ever got from these annual periods of starvation. Knowing exactly the number of strokes to go to a certain mark was another big thing for Conn. Whenever we arrived at a new race course, he would always take a finishing 20-stroke sprint, starting at the finish line, heading back up the course. My job was to find a definitive mark on the shore, which would tell me when we had exactly 20 strokes to go. But Conn wanted even more. During workouts, he had me pick out buoys, piers, or pilings some distance off and tell them when there were 50 strokes to go. If I missed by as much as 1 stroke, he'd tell me how that could cost us the race. I got pretty good at those estimates. When my June 1960 boot camp ended, we left for Seattle to race Roy Rubin and Mike Yonkers, 2 gold medalists from the 1959 Pan Am 4-width. They were training with the Lake Washington Rowing Club in the pair width for the Olympic trials. The deal was this. They had a new bow-loaded pair Stan Pocock had built for Lake Washington Rowing Club. If we rowed for LWRC rather than for Stanford, and if we beat Rubin and Yonkers in training, we'd get to use the new bow-loaded pair, and I could say goodbye to Conn's oilskin hammock and a raw backside from sliding up and down the keel. Ever the mercenaries we were, it sounded like a good deal to us. Before we left the Bay Area, we had one pickup race. It was against Jack Grouse, Conn's 1957 pair partner, and Jack's new partner, Gordy Helmers. They quit rowing with 700 meters to go after we'd built up a 2-length lead in our race with them. Even though they kept on training that summer and eventually came uncomfortably close to us later in Seattle, having given up once, Conn knew they'd never catch us. Conn always said, never quit a race or a time trial, no matter what, or you'll never come back. Years later, Conn also told me that he had never reached the 1,000 meter mark in any race without seriously doubting his ability to finish. An interesting personal admission, giving his never quit mantra. Often I heard him scoff when rowers described having taken several 2,000 meter time trials during a workout. Conn always said, there's no such thing as multiple 2,000 meter time trials. No one has more than one 2,000 meter race in him. Other than the pickup race against Jack and Gordy, we were completely alone in our workouts in Redwood City. With nothing but a ticking stopwatch to race, we sometimes tried to stay ahead of a tugboat or catch up to a slow-flying brown pelican hunting for its supper over San Francisco Bay. Anything to get the race adrenaline flowing. We made up races, imagining that Vesper's pair or some other crew was beside us. We took trials along an 856-foot pier on slack tides and trucked our boat for time trials to what is now the Redwood Shores Race Course in Redwood City. Until 1965, the Redwood Shores course was an undeveloped, shallow slip of brackish salt water diked off from tidal currents. It was accessible only by trespassing through a skeet shooting range, jumping barbed wire fencing, finally reaching the water with a muddy slide down slippery bay mud banks to launch our boat. Still, those time trials, like nothing else we did, told us what we needed to know. We were in the game. When we raced Rubin and Yonkers in Seattle, we won by 3 lengths. The new boat was ours. Roy and Mike ended up qualifying in the Olympic 4-width, one of 4 LWRC crews that won the 1960 trials and went on to Rome. When we left for Rome, I would not say we were cocky about our chances for gold, but we definitely went there with the belief that we could win. Dick and Conn were considerably faster than Dan and Conn had been in Melbourne. We had had a great training period in Seattle with excellent LWRC boats to race against in all 6 Olympic boat categories. LWRC's different small boats were stagger started by Stan at different times on the Montlake course in Lake Washington, appropriately handicapped so that they should end up even at the finish line. What a sight that was. Our pair with Blyden's single, 3 fours with, a double scull, and the straight 4. The order of LWRC's 4 Olympic trials winners was always the same and was borne out in Rome. The 4 without was always first and won gold in Rome. We were always second in our pair and won bronze. The straight pair was always third and was fifth in Rome, and the 4th was always the 4 with, which barely missed the Rome finals. One weekend before we left for Rome, Lake Washington's 2 qualifying pairs and what turned out to be its gold medal straight 4 jumped into a pickup 8 for the first time together and defeated Canada's Olympic 8 in Vancouver. Canada's 8 later went on to win the silver medal in Rome behind Karl Adam's Wunderachter from Germany. Then one afternoon in Rome, after those same LWRC small boats had each taken all-out 2,000-meter time trials in the morning, they borrowed Canada's boat and defeated the US 8 from Navy in its time trial in the afternoon by a full length. The middies had always been joking about the old guys doing jumping jacks after each workout. The next day, the middies were doing them too. When we arrived in Rome, Conn's first thought was the water. Not Lake Albano, where at Castel Gandolfo below the Pope's summer residence, where we'd be racing, but the drinking water. Conn insisted we had to find local water quickly, drink it, get sick if we were going to, and get better before racing started. He found that water spouting onto a street in Rome, coming from an old rock wall. The water was flowing from a rusty pipe which protruded from the wall. Conn cupped his hands, drank the water, and told Dick and me to do the same. It seemed like a bad plan to me, but Conn had done it, so we did it too. None of us got sick, but some of the other Olympic team members did who drank only the good water at the Olympic Village. We knew the German pair was favored in our event. Their Cox was only 12 years old and turned out to be the youngest Olympic gold medalist ever. The Soviets from Vilnius, Lithuania, who hated being called Russians, were supposed to be good, but were tiny standing next to Conn. We could not imagine losing to them. Not so. In our first heat, the Lithuanians cleaned our clock by almost 8 seconds. In one of the other 2 heats, the Germans qualified for the final, barely beating a crew from Uruguay, the 1959 Pan Am gold medalists. Then we drew Uruguay in a repechage that we absolutely had to win to make the finals. Conn always told me, don't ever lie to me during a race. Tell me exactly where we stand at all times, whether we're falling back, holding, or gaining. Whatever. I was to take our stroke rate every 30 seconds from start to finish. Every 30 seconds after the first 500, Conn also wanted me to report stroke rates of every other crew which was even or ahead of us, and the marginal differences. Conn always planned to win coming from behind, and wanted to know what the other crews had expended to get to the 1800-meter mark in order to gauge what they might or might not have left. Looking at our upcoming repechage, we knew we needed to do something different to be even with Uruguay at the 1,000-meter mark. In desperation, we decided to row 36 strokes per minute to the 1,000, something we had never tried before. Incredibly, while we kept our rate at 36 to the 1,000, Uruguay dropped its rate to 31 at the end of the first 500, and was pulling away from us. With 500 meters to go, Uruguay was up 1.5 lengths, still understroking us. For a brief moment I wondered, is it all going to end this way? But Conn's mantra resonated: never quit a race once you've started it. With a little over 2:50 to go, I sensed some shakiness in the Uruguayan boat. I shouted hopefully, "Keep it on, Conn, Dick, they're going to fold now," and I called 35 strokes to go. Uruguay then visibly cracked. I called 25 strokes to go, said, "They're dying and we're only a length back." Just as we reached my predetermined shoreline marker for 20 strokes to go, Conn shouted, "Dick, only 10 strokes to go." I knew that was wrong, and I snapped back, "That's not right, there's 20 strokes to go." At that point we surged. Uruguay completely folded, and we won by several seconds. After crossing the line, Conn spun around, squeezed my head like he was testing an overripe cantaloupe, and said, "Real good job of coxing, Mitch." Coming from Conn, and knowing I told him the truth, when he hadn't, that said it all. I figured I might even get invited back next year. After the race, Conn admitted he knew there were 20 strokes to go when he made his frantic 10-stroke call to Dick. He said he was just trying to get something more from Dick. Conn would have eaten me alive if I had tried that trick. The final was not nearly as dramatic. We were solidly in third place with 750 meters to go, closed a bit on both Germany and the Lithuanians, and ended up losing by only 4 seconds, half the margin of our loss to the Lithuanians a few days before. I remember sitting in the boat in the sunlight near the shore, watching the 3 flags rise with the Germans standing alone on the victory platform, but feeling satisfied with the effort. After Rome, I finished my degree at Stanford. Before starting law school in Berkeley in the fall of 1961, I coxed during the summer for Conn and his new partner, Ed Ferry, preparing for the 1961 Nationals in Philadelphia. He and Ed entered both pair events at Nationals. In the pair with final, they held off challenges from the Amlong brothers of Old Dominion and from Reuben and Yonkers of Lake Washington Rowing Club, who were back in the pair. The next day, Conn and Ed also won the straight pair title, rowing without a rudder, obviously not expecting any rudder emergencies. To win the straight pair, they had to eclipse what looked like an insurmountable 3-length deficit to the Amlongs at the 1,000 meter mark and row them down by the finish line. Conn had found a new partner for the 4-year run-up to Tokyo. The first World Championships were scheduled for August 1962 on the Rotsee in Lucerne, Switzerland. To get there, Conn and Ed had to win the trials for the Pan Am Games in Buffalo, then be certified by the NAAO Foreign Regatta Committee to enter the Worlds. However, all costs to get to the Worlds, including our meals and accommodations while there, and all arrangements for boat and oars, were on us alone. There was no funding available from NAAO or elsewhere. It was at those Worlds, going up a steep staircase at the Goldener Stern Hotel in Lucerne, that Cy Cromwell, Conn, Don Sparrow, and I first discussed the need for a rowing foundation to send U.S. crews to the Europeans. I had just completed my first year of law school. Ed had finished his junior year at Stanford, and Conn was Stanford's varsity coach. One Sunday before we left for the combined Pan Am Worlds trials, Conn called me in Berkeley and said there was a small regatta that day on Lake Merritt in Oakland. 2 of our friends, Chuck Alm and Bruce Halverson, neither of whom had been training, wanted me to enter a 4 with Conn and Ed. Was I willing to cox? Sure. Just before the race, Conn cautioned me, "These other guys are not in shape, so don't call for a sprint unless necessary. Let's just get a lead and do as little as we have to hold it." Conn always said, "Bad things happen in sprints, avoid them whenever possible." With that in mind, we took a quick 3/4 length lead over the nearest crew. I kept telling our crew to back off just enough to hold that lead. With 30 strokes to go, we still had that lead. As instructed, I shouted, "No sprint, we're 3/4 of a length up." When we crossed the line, I watched in horror as the flagman dropped, then immediately raised the finish flag. Evidently, 2 crews had crossed at about the same time. Then I was stunned, and Conn was furious when we got to shore and were told that the other crew beat us by a whisker. Conn nailed me to the cross. What have I always said about knowing where the finish line is and being right about the margins? Coxswains can only lose races, and you lost this one. I was floored and speechless. That was it. I would not get invited back next year. Conn was about to throw me under the bus. I might not even make it to Buffalo. Every workout for the next 3 weeks before we arrived in Buffalo was the same. "Kent, pick a mark 50 strokes away and start counting," is all I heard from Conn. Every time I'd miss by a stroke or two, Conn would lament, "There you go again. That could cost us the race, just like it did at Lake Merritt." I was a beaten dog with nowhere to hide, but I got really good hitting 50-stroke estimates right on the button. In Buffalo, we won the trials. Afterwards, we were standing around with the Amlongs, who were barbecuing rancid slices of meat from a side of beef they'd brought east from Arizona in the trunk of their Studebaker. But that is another story. Conn turned to me casually and said, "Kent, do you remember that race at Lake Merritt?" How could I have forgotten it with all the grief I'd been taking for 3 weeks? Then he added, "I guess we forgot to tell you. The day after that race, Jerry Denham, the president of the Lake Merritt Rowing Club, came down to our boathouse and gave us the winning medals and apologized that the flagman was looking at the wrong mark and we had actually won the race by 3/4 of a length." I then knew why I had escaped being thrown under the bus. The gotcha game had begun in a big way. 2 more tests of our resolve and resilience as a crew remained before Tokyo. The first came quickly in the World Pair Trials in Lucerne, the summer of 1962. We had borrowed a Perche pair from the Germans, whom Conn knew. It was a very heavy old rock. Every day before racing began, Conn chiseled away at that boat, removing wood and weight wherever he could, getting it down to a weight competitive with the other pairs. I never heard what his German friends thought when they got the boat back. We won our heat handily in a headwind, going straight to the finals. By finals day, however, the wind turned to a tail, not our preferred conditions by far. The little guys, windmillers we called them, could really wind it up and still make it to the finish without dying. Conn thrived on rowing down windmillers who usually flew, then died in headwind conditions. This was different. With 400 meters to go in the world's finals, we were in a very safe position for the bronze, ahead of crews we'd beaten in our heat. At the same time, we were too far behind to catch Germany, but had a chance to pass Romania for the silver. Our race plan had been to sprint only the last 200 meters, but with 400 meters to go, we all agreed we didn't come this far just to place third. So we sprinted early and went past Romania into second place. Then, with 10 strokes to go, catastrophe struck. Ed's forearms froze up, severe tendinitis. He could not close his grip on the oar handle, and it started bumping against his body. Conn was the only one rowing. The boat veered wildly against Ed. This was definitely the kind of rudder emergency Conn described during my boot camp. With no other option, I cramped the rudder against Conn, just to stay in our lane. Conn took the last 10 strokes alone. Romania, Denmark, and Russia swept quickly past us, leaving us 5th at the finish line in front of 45,000 screaming European spectators who were filling the stands and lining the hillsides. Yes, bad things do happen in sprints. This was Ed's first international final, and the first time Conn had not medaled in international racing. It was a memory and burden Ed labored under every day for the next 2 years, though through their gold medal victory in the 1963 Pan Ams and up to the eve of the 1964 Nationals when we confronted our next big test. After a couple of years, Conn's and Ed's relationship in the pair often rivaled that of a shaky marriage fighting to avoid a divorce. When two athletes spend so much time, only 26 inches away from each other for 4 years, it begins to wear. Being across the bay in law school, with yet another inner tube spelling me in the boat, I was insulated from all this camaraderie. After Rome and Lucerne, I was also pretty sure Conn wasn't going to throw me under the bus. I did bow out of the Pan Ams, however. The prospect of missing 3 weeks of law classes for a trip to Sao Paulo a month before finals, and because of some personal matters I had to deal with, it made that decision easy. Conn and Ed asked Charlie Blitzer, a Cox at Stanford, to go in my place. Charlie had to ask his mom if he could go. Conn recalls that it was the only time he had to make a personal plea to a coxswain's loving mother for permission to win a gold medal for her son. Then, during the 1964 season, I took on a new role. I became a mediator, intervening in a myriad of stupid disputes between Conn and Ed. One such dispute resulted from Conn's insistence that we drive non-stop, except for gas stops, from Seattle to New York for the 1964 Nationals. Ed wanted to stop for all meals. Conn wanted to push straight through, night and day, switching drivers from back seat to front without even stopping the car. As on previous cross-country trips, meals came from large boxes of dried cereal and crackers carried in the car, and vending machines at gas stations. I helped Ed negotiate a new deal. Conn agreed to stop for dinner, but not for breakfast or lunch. For breakfast and lunch, we had to make do with dried cereal, crackers, and vending machines. The first night at dinner time, Conn was driving, and we were somewhere between Salt Lake and Rock Springs, Wyoming. The highway was fenced along its perimeter. Ed spotted a restaurant up ahead. It was set back from the road on the other side of the fence. Ed asked Conn to pull in for dinner. Conn refused, saying that was not the deal. He said he had agreed to stop for dinner. To Conn, that meant he would stop the car, but not that he'd drive to a restaurant or eat dinner at one. At that, he pulled off the highway and stopped on the shoulder. Ed and I had to climb the fence and walk to the restaurant for our dinner. Conn stayed in the car and ate crackers and Cheerios. Later on the same trip, we were heading for a tunnel on the Pennsylvania Turnpike toward Princeton. We had planned to meet up with single scullers Don Sparrow and Cy Cromwell for a handicapped time trial with them on Lake Carnegie. As one of their many boredom-breaking diversions, at any time either Conn or Ed could punch the other for no reason, which by their rules entitled the other to a free punch back, sort of a way of letting off steam. As we entered the tunnel, Conn was driving. I was in the passenger seat with Conn in the back, and Conn punched Ed in the shoulder, all within the rules. Ed turned and swung wildly back at Conn for his free punch, but hit Conn's nose, which bled profusely. One of their punch rules, however, was never in the face, and a war was on. Each began swinging wildly at the other as the car lurched through the tunnel, Ed looking back and beating on Conn with only one hand on the wheel. I tried in vain to break them up, then dove under the dashboard for my own protection. Somehow we made it through the tunnel. However, for the next week of training for our pair race against Vespers, Boyce Budd, and Emery Clark, neither Conn nor Ed would talk to each other. They talked only through me to each other. Now I was a messenger as well as a mediator. Our second and last big test as a boat before Tokyo was that pairs race at Nationals. The Olympic trials for the small boats were scheduled for a month after the Nationals. In those days, the NAO's Foreign Regatta Committee often received requests from crews to be sanctioned as the U.S. entry to European Championships. There were no trials or other selection processes in place. We had obtained that certification from the committee months before we decided to come east for the Nationals. There was no requirement whatsoever that we even go to the Nationals, but we decided to do so. It was on our way to Amsterdam. We also shipped a pair by air at our own expense from San Francisco to Amsterdam before the Nationals, then drove back east with a second pair on top of our car to use at Nationals. Bud and Clark were already on the Olympic team as members of the Vesper 8 that had already won the 8 trials. They were therefore ineligible for any other Olympic event, but they had been training all year in the pair and wanted a shot at us. They got it in what was perhaps the best pair with race ever in the United States. We were tied 4 or 5 times down the course, but in the final sprint, Vesper took us. Then lightning struck, and Jack Kelly convinced the Foreign Regatta Committee that Bud and Clark should go to Amsterdam, not us. We protested in vain, saying we'd been certified already, but they sent Bud and Clark, and we did not go. We couldn't get to a phone fast enough to call Amsterdam and tell Flying Tiger Airlines to load our boat aboard the next westbound plane before Vesper got hold of it. No love lost there. As it turned out, Vesper did scour Amsterdam hoping to use our boat, but they never found it. In the end, the Vesper pair did not even make the finals in Amsterdam. Maybe they borrowed an old rebuilt Persch pair from the Germans. Anyway, East Germany won handily. Then a week later, a Czech crew, which had skipped the Europeans, beat East Germany, although we easily qualified for the Olympic team a month later. Given the sequence of events following Nationals, our prospects for a medal in Tokyo looked dim indeed. When Sports Illustrated's pre-Olympic issue came out, describing prospects for U.S. crews in Tokyo, our pair was not even mentioned as being on the team. Only one person thought we could win, Conn's mother, Louise. Thanks, Louise. Needless to say, there was no pressure on us at all when we arrived in Tokyo. However, we had spent the 2 months after Nationals focusing on our technique at the release. Our 500-meter times had improved dramatically since Nationals by 3 to 4 seconds by the time we left for Tokyo. We knew we were much faster, but no one else knew. The first Olympic heats were drawn from 18 nations entered in our event. Wouldn't you know it? We drew East Germany and 3 other finalists from the Europeans and the Czechs. A few days before the first heat, we took a 1,000-meter time trial on Tokyo's Toda rowing course. The East German coach followed us on a bike with his watch in hand. He tracked us down the course. Then he went back to run his own crew over the same 1,000 meters. It got back to us later that our time was faster. Then we won our heat and qualified for the final. I remember standing in the shower room afterwards when Conn said, "You know, Ed, we can win this thing." Suddenly the tension hit all of us where things had been rather easygoing before. One unforeseen hurdle remained. In the 4 years Conn and Ed had rowed together, they verbally trashed each other's choices of women friends. Another form of punch and punch back, I guess. Ed always dated the most gorgeous ladies. Conn's friends never quite measured up to Ed's beauty queen standards. Part of the daily sport between them was seeing who could out-disparage the other's girlfriend the most. One thing was clear, though. None of these personal relationships with women was ever to interfere with training or racing. Thus the final complication. Conn's current girlfriend signed up on an Olympic tour organized by a sports writer with the San Francisco Chronicle. She arrived in Tokyo about a week before the finals. Conn came to me one afternoon and said I had to help him. His friend, Ruth I'll call her, was here. He could not ignore Ruth, and he planned to have a few dinners with her before racing began. He said I had to cover for him, or Ed would go nuts and lose all focus for the races ahead. I agreed, but to this day I do not recall any of the cover stories I made up. My covers must have been good, though, or else Ed was very gullible. Ed never found out or suspected a thing. On the day of the finals, we were paddling out lane 0 next to the shoreline for the start of our race. It was a dark, blustery, rainy day. The stands near the finish were full, but elsewhere along the course there was no one. When we were about 500 meters from the starting line, I looked over at the shore. there was Ruth, standing alone, waving a hanky, shouting, "Good luck, Conn! Good luck, Ed!" Ed swung around, incredulous, and saw her. He put it all together immediately and started screaming the worst things to Conn about deception, about Ruth. I cannot even repeat here what he said. He was wild and out of control, and we were less than 10 minutes from the start of our most important race in 4 years. I sat up in the boat and did everything I could to calm Ed down, get his head back in the boat. He was almost back to normal when the starter's flag dropped. Fortunately, it was a false start, and on the restart, Ed was ready to go. But it was close to disaster. After 500 meters, we were in second place in lane 2, about 2/3 of a length behind the Soviets in lane 1. France and Holland in lanes 6 and 5 were closely behind us. The Czechs and the Poles in the middle lanes were falling back. We sat that way for the next 1,100 meters. With 400 meters to go, exactly where we were 2 years before when we sprinted into our rudder emergency in Lucerne, Conn calmly asked Ed, "Do you want to do it now?" Ed replied, "Yes." I called, "Stroke up 4 to 36," and we swept by an astonished Soviet crew into the lead. With 20 strokes to go, Ed swears he heard the sweetest call I'd ever made when I said, "We're ahead, no sprint." He knew then the gold was ours. In rowing circles, we all talk about getting the most spacing for our boats. It was no different for Conn, Ed, and me. After the games were over, Conn boarded a slow steamer for Southeast Asia, heading toward Europe on a long journey to the States. Ed flew directly to Paris and did some traveling on the continent. I jumped the first team plane back home and took a job with a large law firm in San Francisco. In early November, with Conn near Indonesia, Ed in Paris, and me in San Francisco, I received a postcard from Ed saying he thought the spacing between us was just about right then, and it was. Over the 45 years that have followed Tokyo, Conn, Ed, and I have remained absolute best friends and confidants, largely a result, I think, of the ups and downs we weathered together during our competitive years. I talk to Conn every week and see him often. He will be 80 this year. He hasn't slowed down a bit, as octogenarians should. He and his wife Lou are even building a new home for themselves on the shoreline of the California Delta on Bethel Island. His vehicle of choice these days is any used Lincoln Town Car he finds for sale, just like the one he purchased last fall in Vermont and drove back to California with Lou. I am sure Lou insisted that Conn stop for meals and did not let him pack dried crackers and cereal in the back seat. In retrospect, I think surviving 5 years as Conn's coxswain deserves some kind of recognition, perhaps a merit badge for humility and silence on those many occasions when I was certain I was about to be thrown under the bus. Thank you.